only for more Shaggy as time goes on.
Only until Lag BaOmer, right?
God willing, Lou. We'll see.
Yeah.
Hey, so continuing where we left off last time, we were just finishing the third Mishnah in chapter 5 of Pirkei Avot, which talks about all the generations that God was patient with people, the generations from Adam to Noah, the generations from Noah to Abraham. And one of the reasons I think it was so important to emphasize this was that this was really what the rabbis were having to live through also. There was an overwhelming need for patience. If you were hoping to maintain Jewish life, you were facing all kinds of obstacles. You were living through the time when the Romans had, done their best to put severe limits on Jewish life. You're living in the period of the early Christians who have not yet taken power in Rome, but who are more present and certainly represent a threat to Jewish survival in that time. And so the rabbis say, look how patient God was. Look how patient God was with us. And so we're going to have to be patient too, because life in these days is filled with all sorts of problems and obstacles, and we have no alternative. Right? The alternative is to give up and drop the Jewish enterprise altogether. So the rabbis, have a good reason for emphasizing the patience with which God managed the early generations of creation. And with that, let's go to Mishnah number 4, right? Where 10 is also an important number. It says, Asara nisyonot nitnasa Avraham Avinu v'yamad b'chulam. Our father Abraham was tested with 10 trials, and he passed them all. Lahodia kama chibato shel Avraham Avinu. And this shows just how great Abraham's love was for God, right? That he passed all the 10 trials. Now, the tradition that Abraham had 10 trials probably precedes the writing of Pirkei Avot, so we're going way, way back. I'm sure all of you know what the 10th trial was. Yes?
Well, it's either the Akedah or finding a burial place for Sarah.
Akedah is number 10. Apparently, finding a burial place for Sarah doesn't seem to be one of those. Which, fortunately, it didn't turn into that big a trial. And I would guess that some of you know what the first trial was. What was the first trial Abraham faced?
Lech Lecha.
Yes, God says, Lech Lecha, go forth, leave your homeland, leave your place of birth, go to the land that I will show you. God doesn't even give him a roadmap, but just says, get going. And so that certainly was a trial. I wouldn't expect anybody to be able to list the 10 trials, because before I first prepared a class on Pirkei Avot, I didn't know what they all were either. But just so you know, the second trial was a famine that took place just after he went to the new land. Imagine that. God says, go to this new place, and all of a sudden, there's no food, there's no water. It's not good, right? The third trial, well, you know how his wife Sarah was taken by the Pharaoh, and the bad consequences of that were only prevented by God's intervention. The fourth trial was a war that took place with 4 kings in his neighborhood. The fifth trial was Sarah's infertility, right? We know about that. And, going along with that, the subsequent challenge with the concubine Hagar. The sixth trial was having to circumcise himself at the age of 99. Ouch. Yeah, that would definitely qualify as a trial. Number 7, another attempt to steal Sarah, this one from King Avimelech of Gerar, with results that were similar to those suffered by the Pharaoh, who tried to do the same thing. Number 8 was having to send away his concubine Hagar. Number 9, having to send away his son Ishmael. Right? So if you go through a lifetime filled with trials like that, well, congratulations, you're an Abraham. Right? The rest of us, it'd be nice. We could just try to be normal, good Jews. Right? We don't usually have to face quite so many trials. It's not clear exactly why Abraham was given 10 trials, but we know the result of all these trials. The result is we know how much he had to overcome, that in the end, God is the Magen Avraham, the shield of Abraham. God chose someone who could deal with all of these challenges. And because he proved to be this kind of person, he became the catalyst for developing the first Jewish family, the family that all of our Jewish families inherit. So Abraham's faithfulness is meant to be an inspiration for everyone in the Jewish family he began. Lou, you had a question.
Yeah, 8 and 9, why would the sending away of Hagar and Ishmael be 2 separate trials because they happened at the same time?
Probably because he felt differently about both of them. That there was great regret involved with each one. That's why, at least that's why the rabbis classify it. Either that, Lou, or they couldn't figure out another one.
Splitting the land with his nephew Lot might have been one. I don't know. Or Sodom and Gomorrah.
But that didn't seem to be such a trial with him. He doesn't seem to have any regrets about that. He was fine with Lot and he was fine without Lot. Yes, Roberto.
Okay, you mentioned number 6, circumcision, that it happened when he was 90-something. Is that how the circumcision started actually in the Jewish life?
Well, it is the first actual case of circumcision, but it doesn't become a mitzvah for the entire Jewish people until we read it in yesterday's Torah portion, chapter 12 of Leviticus. And that's where it really becomes binding as a Jewish practice. Right? But there it was just directed to Abraham.
Oh, so when it's written in the Torah, like you say, then it became like obligation that if you don't get the circumcision, you're not Jewish or something like that, or no?
Not that you are not Jewish, but it's a mitzvah. And if it wasn't done when it was supposed to be done, it becomes a mitzvah that is obligated, that is your obligation to fulfill whenever you can. Now, I haven't had to deal with that many adult circumcisions, but you know, we certainly had a few when people came from the former Soviet Union, who either their parents couldn't arrange it or didn't arrange it, considered it very dangerous at the time that the children were born. And when they came to America, many of them wanted to be circumcised because they had learned they knew that that was their Jewish responsibility. Yes,
I'm asking that because there's some movements even in Israel now that there are people against the circumcision. So that's what I was saying.
yes. Well, you know what the first movement against circumcision was? Christianity. Right? Which, I mean, it may explain some of the, you know, one of the reasons why Christianity became so popular. You know, they didn't ask all these crazy things that we Jews are supposed to do, right? You don't have to keep kosher, you don't have to keep Shabbat, and you don't have to circumcise your little boys. Yeah, Lou.
So, two comments. One, my son had his Brit Milah at 30 days because he had a health issue.
Yes.
And a friend of mine now had two grandchildren born one day apart, one in Houston, one in New York. The one in Houston had the Brit Milah on the 8th day, and the one in New York is still waiting because of the coronavirus issues.
Right, right.
Oh my God.
There is, by the way, a significant dispute going on about whether Brit Milah should be done at this time. Right? And as you would expect with any Jewish issue, there's not an agreement. Right? But you know, there are those who say, well, we should not be exposing them to contact with the moil, right? And the moalim are often saying, well, you know, it's a lot better to be exposed to us than to be in the hospital, right? Where are you most likely to be exposed to the virus, if not the hospital, right? So I'm certainly not here to offer an answer to that question, only to tell you that it's a significant question right now. Okay, other comments or questions before we go on to the next piece?
Okay, I have a question. So,
Yes, Francois.
so from your inputs, so you think that the circumcision stopped with Isaac? So Jacob did not get circumcised?
I don't believe there is any place where it says that Jacob was circumcised. He may have been, right? It may have been something that continued for a few generations. It's not, you know, it's clear that by the time the Torah comes to the story of Moses, and at that point, circumcision is not an ongoing thing. Now we do read about, you know, the story of, you know, Moses' wife circumcising their son, probably their son. It's a very unclear passage, but you know, it's also clear that, you know, it's not until Leviticus that we have a clear mitzvah to perform circumcision on every Jewish child,
I see.
every Jewish boy.
Yeah.
But they did all get circumcised just before the Exodus.
Well, maybe.
So
That's a midrash.
That it's not clear from the Torah, not at all.
Because I was under the impression that the observant descendants were following the circumcision concept. And the reason why you mentioned about Moses' wife, like otherwise, how did she know about the circumcision? Or, I mean, this kind of like just raised some questions in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
It's not clear, except she knows she has to do something. You know, in the moment when it seems that Moses is being attacked by some kind of illness, but it's really not clear anywhere in the text of the Torah that Brit Milah is a mitzvah for the Jewish people until you get to Parshat Tazria. Now, it's a popular myth that, yes, the observant Jews, you know, the committed ones, they maintained that practice following Abraham and Isaac and so on. But there's no real evidence for it. Okay. Okay, other comments, questions? I just, you know, those of you who are following without video, you'll just have to speak up if you have comments or questions, okay? Thank you. Next, so Rabbi Gordon Tucker, a contemporary commentator, questions the premise of the 10 trials of Abraham. He says, when it says Abraham had 10 trials, it's just a kind of a conventional way of saying a lot. You know, it's like, you know, when we lose our patience and we say to a child, you know, I've told you 10 times not to do that. Right? And it's not clear that Abraham really passed every single test. Does he pass the test of the famine in Canaan when he goes to Egypt and tries to protect his life by passing off his wife as his sister? That's kind of debatable, right? But we still remember Abraham as one who withstood many trials, okay, and earned his place as a Jewish model.
I have one input here.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that Abraham, perhaps the only mistake was when he had a feast, when Isaac was weaning.
Yes.
Okay. He only invited the great people and did not invite like poor people on, and he just
yes, that is a midrash. You know, to counter that is the midrash about you know, why was it that Abraham was waiting at the entrance of his tent when the angels came? Because he was always out there waiting to show hospitality to anyone who would pass by in the desert. So you have midrash versus midrash, which means you know that in terms of fact, you know, within the text, that is. And I mean, I'm not saying that the text is factual. I'm just saying that you know, the text is what we have. The text really isn't conclusive about all that. Okay? I know there are some of you who, when you read the Torah, you read it through the lens of the midrash very often. Right? And that's okay with me. Right? I love the midrash too. I just want you to be aware of when there is a difference between the text and the midrash. Right? You know, classically, the great midrash, and a lot of people seem to think it's in the text of the Torah, is the story about Abraham destroying his father's idols. Right? And a lot of people are staggered to find that that's not in the Torah. That's not in the Torah. I mean, I heard that when I was a kid. I heard that story. Well, yes, but it's in the Midrash. It's not in the text, right? Because the Midrash had to offer some rationale why Abraham was special, why God would ask him to begin this new nation and to leave his birthplace. Yes, Anne.
Well, in my Sunday school book, it said that it was a story that Jews have been telling their children for thousands of years. It didn't say it was in the Torah. But whenever there's a conflict between one midrash and another midrash, it's because each one has something to teach us. Not about what happened, but something else.
Yeah, different midrashim are the rabbi's attempts to answer different questions. Right? So, you know, what is it about Abraham that made him so special? Right? So the midrash about, you know, breaking his father's, that his father was an idol maker and Abraham broke the idols, all of that is one answer from the rabbis. You could give lots of other answers, and you know, Maimonides has a whole piece on it in the very beginning of the Mishnah Torah, his vast collection of Jewish law. So we call him Avraham Avinu, our father Abraham. Abraham is the founder of the Jewish idea, as well as the Jewish people. And it is his great-great-grandchildren who become Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. So the people of Israel start out as a family whose members feel a kinship and a responsibility for each other. When someone converts to Judaism, we call them Ben Avraham, a child of Abraham, because he's become part of our family by identifying with our values and the teachings that begin with Abraham. So this teaching in Pirkei Avot says that the trials show Abraham's love of God. Now, here's a question for you. How much are you willing to go through if you love someone? And that's a pretty broad question, right? But if you really love someone, you're willing to go through a lot for them. I remember years ago, I read a wonderful story. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, in one of his many books, tells a story about how his wife was pregnant and she would get certain late night cravings. Midnight, she wants a chocolate bar, right? And there's no chocolate in the house. You know, this was back when you didn't have a 24-hour store in every neighborhood. He said it was like becoming an extension of her. You know, driving around town looking for a vending machine where he could get a chocolate bar. Right? Sometimes you do something way out of the ordinary. Why? Out of love. And so Abraham's devotion was not just based on intellectual belief and on faith, but also on love. At least that is my understanding of Abraham's commitment. Comments or questions before we go further? All right, next. Number 5, Asara Nisim Na'asu La'avotenu b'Mitzrayim. 10 miracles were performed for our ancestors in Egypt, Va'asara al hayam, and 10 more at the sea. Eser makot hevi HaKadosh Baruch Hu la Mitzrayim b'Mitzrayim. The Holy One, praised be He, brought 10 plagues upon the Egyptians in Egypt. Ba'asara al hayam, and 10 more at the sea. Right? So, we know about 10 plagues in Egypt, 10 miracles there. But what's this piece about 10 miracles at the sea? Right? So Rashi says that this refers to a midrash, which tells how the people made Moses perform all kinds of miracles with God's staff before they would actually be willing to cross the sea. And this midrash considers the crossing to be a test of God. And it's also consistent with how the Bible evaluates the Israelites as being am kashei oref, a stiff-necked people. Right? Very demanding bunch, these Jews. Right? I'm sure some would argue they still are. But that's why we needed to have all these miracles, because otherwise the Jews wouldn't go forward. So another answer as to why we had to have 10 miracles at the sea after all the miracles in Egypt. The Maharal of Prague explains that God helped the Israelites overcome 2 kinds of opposition. One from people and one from nature. Now, people will be creative and resourceful, sometimes unpredictable, but nature is not subject to change. Nature can act with overwhelming force. So God had to perform 2 acts of salvation. One of them was saving the Israelites from the Pharaoh and his cruelty. And the other one is God saving them from nature and from its power. And the miracles at the sea were the ones which completely ended the bondage in Egypt. Because without the miracles at the sea, you have nowhere to go except back. And there's also a rabbinic teaching which says that God brought 10 plagues on the Egyptians in the merit of Abraham, who withstood 10 tests. So how are the plagues compared to the tests? Maharal of Prague explains, Abraham passed the tests by taking control of his own natural inclinations. He had to overcome his own impulses. And God, who remembers this, then rescinded the natural order 10 times to save the descendants of Abraham, who overcame his own impulses and his own nature. And this teaching connects the miracles of the sea to the plagues. God intervening in human affairs gets very complicated. Every positive intervention, every time God gets involved in doing something on our behalf, it has a downside. And the downside is that we get hooked on miracles and on the need for miracles. We think that we can't do without them. And every time we get one, we want another one. Miracles didn't create faith. That's pretty clear from the chapter in Exodus right after the song at the sea, chapter 16. Okay? It was clear that as soon as they got across the sea and went out into the desert, they started complaining. They sort of said, why, what did you bring us out here for? It's the miracle made everybody happy for a little bit, and then a new problem occurred, and everybody was a little short-handed on faith. So we shouldn't depend on miracles. Knowing that they make the world better gets us through some difficult times, but the rabbi said, Ein somchin ala nes. You shouldn't count on having miracles. And of course, in our time, most of us understand that miracles are not going to happen, that we have to take responsibility for making the world what we want it to be. If God is not necessarily going to save Jews from oppression, from anti-Semitism, it's going to be up to us to deal with that. And I think that's fairly typical of the attitude in the state of Israel from beginning right up to today, that we have to take responsibility for our own defense. We do it, and we do it gladly. We do it because what's the alternative? Ein somchen ala nes. You can't depend on miracles. So comments or questions up to here? Yes, Lou. Lou, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, is there a listing of the 10 miracles at the sea? I can think of about 4 or 5.
Yeah, there is not, unfortunately, at least not that I am aware of. There might be someone hidden away in the Midrash, but I'm not familiar with it. Yes, other questions? Yeah, Ann.
Doesn't it say that there are all kinds of fruits hanging? They could just reach out and get a nice orange or something and give it to the baby, or stuff like that.
That is one thing that I know is mentioned in the Midrash, that that food magically appeared during the crossing. So not only did you get to cross on dry land, but you got fed along the way. Sounds pretty cool, huh?
And the people said Zeh because they actually saw Hashem.
This. Yeah, so that's an interesting midrash on the text, that when they say Zeh vanvehu, this is my God and I will glorify him, that there has to be something specific about this. And what is that? It's that they actually saw God. Well, that doesn't jive with what we see elsewhere in the Torah, but it's a midrash, right? Midrashim are not always consistent, but they do solve the problems of the text, or at least they attempt to. In this one, what's the this that they were referring to?
They said that.
What, Ann?
They say that the word "this" is a pointer word. That's why it says we shall not say "this" is whatever until
right. And
more.
it's a pointer word. It has to be pointing to something specific. Therefore, came that midrash.
It's a really nice little midrash about the babies who were born under the tree because the wives had faith that they would be rescued. And those were the ones who said, "Oh, that's the one that took care of me after I was born under the tree."
Mm-hmm.
Remember that one?
I've heard it. Other questions? Joe, is that you raising your hand? If so, unmute yourself. If not, don't worry. Okay, let's go to number 6. Asara nisyonot nisu avotenu et hamakom baruchu bamidbar. Now, this one is, this is not just about us having 10 trials. It says that our ancestors 10 times tested God's patience in the wilderness. Shene'emar, as it says, this is a verse from Numbers chapter 14, Vayanasu oti ze eser pa'amim. They have tested me these 10 times, V'lo shamu b'koli, and they didn't listen to my voice. God has his complaints about the Jewish people too. And one of them is they don't pay attention to me. They don't listen to me. Ignore me. I do all these things for the Jews, and what do I get? They ignore me. So not only did Abraham have 10 tests, but so did God. And this teaching is directly connected to the previous one, which told us that there are, not only 10 plagues, but 10 miracles at the sea. We test God when we expect a miracle. We test God when we ask God to fix what we can't fix ourselves. So, be glad if you get a miracle once in a while, but remember that the Talmud says not to rely on miracles. And you would think that after all God did for the Israelites, that they would have been grateful, they would show more thankfulness to God, and you would think that God could expect that. But there's no reciprocity, there's no gratitude. People aggravate God, question God, rebel against God. Well, just as we saw with the generations before Abraham, God is patient. I hope God is that patient with us and with our generation. Right? Because I have a feeling sometimes that we're testing God a little bit now. So, what exactly are the 10 trials of God? Okay? So, number one, is after the Israelites saw the plagues, they complained at the sea. Before they got through, they were afraid they'd be killed. They said, better to slave for the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Number two, after they get saved at the sea, they go 3 days and they start complaining about the water. Number three, they get an endless supply of water and then they start to complain about food. Sounds like a Jewish group, right? This cantaloupe isn't fresh, right? Number four, they get manna and they get more quail than they can possibly eat, and they don't have faith that they will get more manna the next day. Ever seen leftover manna? It's like something gross that survived in your refrigerator. Okay? Number five, the Israelites get a double portion of manna on Friday, and then they violate God's instructions and they go out for more the next day. You believe these guys? They don't believe God when he gives them a double portion for Friday and for Shabbat. Number six, they threaten Moses again when they don't find water right away. They say, is God here or not? And the place even gets called Masa and Merivah, which means trial and quarrel. Very difficult bunch, these Israelites. Number eight, a little deeper in the desert, they complain that God has abandoned them. Number nine, they go to this place called Kivrot HaTa'ava, and they fetch more. And they want meat. We want meat. We haven't had any meat lately. And number 10, when they get the report of the spies about how hard it's going to be to conquer Canaan, they panic at that report. They're not exactly the most faithful generation of Jews. Yes, Ann?
Why in all this list do we not have the golden calf story? Doesn't that count?
It's a good question. It's not on the list, and it really should be. But, I think that the rabbis had a special place for the creation of the golden calf. That was an act of idolatry. It was a violation of the Ten Commandments. So maybe they just put that in a class of its own. Yes, Francois.
Okay, you know, I think the first requesting for the manna because they did not have food, and so it's kind of like legit to ask for food. The other request, what asking were unnecessary. So maybe that should be counted, and instead the gold calf should be counted more as one of those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
That's my opinion. That's all.
Okay. Yeah. The bottom line, I don't know exactly why the rabbis didn't include that one as one of the 10. Okay. But I think the key thing that this teaching wants to put across to us is that in spite of all the ways in which that generation aggravates God, God does not disown them. God does not reject them. And he waited for the next generation. And who knows, maybe God learned patience in dealing with trials from Abraham. You know? But, you know, in every relationship, certainly in every love relationship, you know, one partner might question whether it was a mistake. And sometimes the relationship only holds together because they're just determined to stick it out. God stuck it out, and so eventually the Jewish people did too. The Maharal of Prague points out that the translation of nisayon as trial doesn't fit well with the context of the Mishnah. He also suggests an answer to your question, Francois. You know, building the golden calf was more of a sin rather than a trial. And he relates the word nisayon, trial, to the word nes, which is miracle, right? Something not within nature. He says the behavior of the Israelites, was unnatural. It was unimaginable that they should act that way towards God. He says, it was the merit of Abraham that saved the Israelites. Right? Now, one of the sad parts of these two teachings about Abraham's 10 trials and the 10 trials of God is that while Abraham withstood all of his tests, his descendants, who experienced so many more miracles as well as the afflictions that were given to their oppressors, they not only repeatedly failed to withstand tests of faith, but they actually turn around and test God. So that's maybe why we address God in the Amidah as Magen Avraham, the shield of Abraham, so that we might remember to be more faithful like Abraham and less like the Israelites of that generation. Another insight from a contemporary rabbi, Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum. She says, it's one thing to try God, it's another thing to challenge God. Existence itself is a challenge to human beings, but we Jews, sometimes we believe in challenging God when things don't go as God himself would want. Challenging God isn't as bad as saying, let's go back to Egypt. We should challenge God when we're confronted with real evil. But we also have to pray for the strength to deal with it, however we have to do it. Challenging God, the late Dr. Yochanan Mufs wrote that biblical religion doesn't seem to require the man of faith to just repress his doubts and, silently be resigned to whatever's happening. Abraham is one of those people in the Bible who questions God. So does the prophet Jeremiah. So does Job. Right? And they're not considered wicked people. And there's some evidence even that God demands such criticism, at least from his prophets. There's a lot of precedent for even celebrating that kind of confrontation. And hopefully our faith is strong enough to allow others around us to do that. Most people who have a near-death experience say that they're going to live differently, and it's going to change how they decide to live. Facts are, most of them don't change. A few months go by after a big experience, and we go back to doing the same thing. But by contrast, when a Jew goes to a place where a miracle took place, there's a blessing for it. We say a blessing, She'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. We thank God who did a miracle here for me in this place. And Rabbi Shmuel Yankovitz writes, says, our challenge is to hold on to gratitude. And in moments of chaos and tension, like the Israelites in the wilderness, draw upon faith to be our best. So again, let me open it up for comments and questions at this point. Yes, Ann.
She'asa li nes. What's the rest of it?
She'asa li nes b'makom hazeh.
Oh,
I was saying that this is awesome what you just said, because as we remember the miracles, it happens while crossing, like the 10 miracles in Egypt, and so we can remember about God. I'm pretty sure everyone's life there's miracles happen, and if we can just as well remember those as we remember the miracles in the past, it would be a good reminder for us to not forget.
Mm-hmm. I remember when our first child was born, and that definitely seemed like a miracle, but it was also a miracle that we sort of accepted just kind of fit into the natural order. It was pretty fantastic, but it was still a natural miracle. Whether you think of the crossing of the sea or the splitting of the sea as a natural miracle or as something supernatural, you would think it would be something for people to remember and just to, you know what? When my kid was a teenager and got aggravating, I didn't think about, how miraculous it was when she was born. I just thought, boy, this is annoying, right? And I think sometimes that maybe that's the way the Israelites were, They got through, they got out of slavery, they got through the sea, and then they had new responsibilities and new challenges, and they said, God, is this awful? And maybe to a certain extent they were right, because with those those times of independence, there comes responsibility and all sorts of challenges.
Mentioning that splitting the sea is a really good example, because as a human, we sometimes find ourselves in a situation where there's no exit, like we are in dead end, and then miraculously a way open up for us as a solution.
Yeah.
So, just kind of like, I see things in parallel that goes like, and it happens in our days and remind us we can relate on those kind of things as well. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Francis. Other comments or questions before we go on? All right, we have a few more minutes, so let's take a look at the beginning of the seventh Mishnah, and we will definitely not get through this entire thing because this is significantly longer. But it says that Asara Nisim Na'asu Lavotenu Beveit HaMikdash. There were 10 miracles performed for our ancestors in the temple. Now, what are we really saying when we say that miracles were performed for our ancestors in the temple? What I think we're saying is that the temple itself was a miraculous place, and that it was experienced in a way that people felt especially close to God. Again, this is a little different from active miracles, changes in nature, and so forth. The things that are going to be listed here, these are things that were miracles because they were things that didn't happen, right? And you couldn't say, I won't go to Jerusalem because the conditions are so horrendous. You might have thought they would be, but they weren't. And so everybody wanted to go to Jerusalem, if you possibly could, to make pilgrimage, to bring an offering, to participate in the grandeur, and even from the standpoint of many of the people, to see God. That's what you went for. You went to have, as it were, a vision of holiness. So, what is the first of these miracles? It says, Lo hipila isha mereach basar hakodesh. Said no woman miscarried from the scent of the sacrificial meat. From which we would derive that, in other places and at other times, the scent of raw meat was probably not too appetizing, and women would react violently to that, even to the point of miscarrying. They say, no, that never happened in the temple, right? Now, I'm not, I actually grew up in Oklahoma City, and there was a part of town where when you got close to it, you knew you were there. You didn't have to see anything. All you had to do was smell it. And that was the stockyards, right? When you get close to the stockyards, you don't need a sign to tell you you're about there, right? It's not a divine odor, right? Just the opposite. Yet the rabbis are saying it was never the source of any harm. The presence of animals that were used for sacrifices could only be experienced as blessings. Now, there's nothing so extraordinary about a woman not losing her pregnancy. But there is if no woman ever loses her pregnancy in Jerusalem, even though there must have been a terrible odor together with the temple. I mean, PU, right? So, and speaking of miscarriages, the Maharal of Prague says there's a reason why that comes first in this list. All the other things that we're going to mention in this Mishnah, they are just inconveniences. Miscarriage is a loss of a potential life. That's huge. The other losses that didn't happen in the temple would have been more likely. But even though this was unlikely, it was listed first. But do remember that a miscarriage is a loss of potential life, not actual life. Causing a miscarriage is criminal, according to the Torah. It's not considered murder. And just putting that out there. Okay, we are at the end of our time. So thank you all very much for being here. And for those of you coming to my next class, I'll see you in half an hour.
Rabbi, is there some more chapters that we can print or see?
Yes, I will have more material printed up for you, and hopefully by next week I will figure out exactly how to do share screen so that I can, just put it up on the screen and you can see it and not
Not printed.
and not have to hunt for those materials.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Rabbi
Thank
Danny.
you.
Yep.
Rabbi Danny. Rabbi Danny. I guess he's calling.